Good morning. This is 8th grade music today, and I am going to introduce you to a composer that I purposely do this at Christmas time, and I'll explain to you why in just a minute. But one of your assignments, either this week or last week, was to read the bio of George Friedrich Handel, and he is a composer. We always talk about him in 8th grade music, and this is his picture. George Friedrich Handel, and there it was an assignment either this week or last week about reading his bio and then filling out a worksheet about him to learn a little bit more about the life of George Friedrich Handel and his music. And he is a composer who spent most of his time composing in London, but near the end of his life, when he was in his mid-50s, that's really not the end of his life, trust me, but near the end of his career, he was not as popular as he used to be, and that was starting to bother him, and he was hard to find work. And there is something called, and this is something that is not just related to music, but it's a term that is related to lots of other things, whether it be art or reading or poetry or writing or movies or something like that. This is a word called commission, and you're going to need to know what this is. And a commission, if you've ever heard of that word before, sometimes you might think of it as maybe a mom or a dad who has a job where they earn commission for their work. And that, in that situation, is kind of like maybe your mom or dad is a car salesman and they don't get the same paycheck every single week or every single month. And it's not always the same thing because it depends on whether you sold some things or not. My husband's a salesman, and he sells different things, and depending on if he has a good month and he's sold lots of things, then he gets a commission. He gets a little piece of the profit from people from his boss that of the work that he worked hard. If you were a car salesman and you just a lot of times when you walk in there, you might walk in there and four car salesmen come to you and ask you what's going on. And if you need some help, and they'd love to help you out. Or a house, if you're a real estate person and you sell a house, you make a certain percentage on that house. So if you don't work very hard, your paycheck may be kind of little, but if you work super hard, you get rewarded for that. And that seems to be a fair thing, because if there are other people in your office or working in your career that don't do anything and they just sit there and expect people to walk up to them and hand them a sale, then that should probably be reflected in their paycheck, and they wouldn't get as much for their paycheck. So if you work really hard in these type of situations and these type of jobs, if you work really hard and you make some money for the company, then you get commission. Your paycheck is going to be bigger than just sitting there waiting for somebody to hand you something. This is a different kind of commission. This kind of commission is creating something that's never been done. You're hired to create something. So if you are commissioned, this means that somebody comes to you and says, I would like you to create something for me that's never ever been done before, and it's the first time it's ever been done. So for example, if you were a rich person back in the 1700s or 1800s and you wanted to surprise your husband or your wife with a birthday gift, you might commission or hire someone, a sculptor, to maybe make a statue of your wife, or maybe make a statue of your husband. Or maybe you would commission or hire an artist to paint a painting of your wife or your husband. That was very common this is the Baroque period. We're not going to learn a lot about all the different musical periods if we learned about medieval, but during the Baroque period, it was pretty normal for people to commission or hire someone to do something that's never ever been done before. Maybe it's to write a poem for a love poem or a love song for somebody. That person's being hired and they're going to be paid for something. It's their responsibility to come up with something up in their head that's never ever been done. So whoever is a recipient of that gets something very, very special, like a world premiere or something. Well, George Friedrich Handel was this composer, and he was hired and he was commissioned by a hospital in Dublin, Ireland. they were having a big fundraiser and they were having a great big concert, and they hired Handel to commission or to come up with an idea of some type of musical concert to have. They would sell tickets to, and they would have a big fundraiser, and people would come to the concert. They would spend more money on tickets than normally because it's a fundraiser for the hospital. They would come and they would sit there and have front row audience. They would have it be they're not recipients, but they would be people sitting at the very first world premiere concert of whatever Handel came up with. And so he was hired to do this. He had to come up with something that had never been done before. And so he came up with an idea of coming up with a concert that the whole thing is about the life and death of Jesus Christ. Now I'm going to erase this real quick here so you can see. He wrote something called the Messiah. And it was a concert. It was a collection of songs that would all be performed in the same concert. It was a collection of songs that were all about the life of the prophecy and the life and the death of Jesus Christ. And so it would go in order. There are several songs to this. It would go in order of what was going on all the way back to the Old Testament before Jesus was even born. They would talk about, there were prophets who would talk about what was going to be coming in the future. And there is actually a song that you know very well that we sing every Christmas concert. That was one of the songs that was written by George Friedrich Handel, and it was part of the Messiah. I want you to listen to it, and I think you're going to recognize it. Sound familiar? Anything sound familiar for that? That was one of the songs that was written in the Messiah, for unto us a child is born. And of course, you know that because every Christmas, that's the finale of our Christmas concert, except for this year because it's going to be a virtual concert. So we're not going to be able to do it this year. But anyway, that was one of the songs that was written for and commissioned for this hospital to have their big fundraiser concert. It's part of the Messiah. Now that's one of the first songs in the Messiah because that is a prophecy. It's in Isaiah. It's in the Old Testament. And those are prophets from hundreds of years before Jesus was even born saying, someday this is going to happen. And that's the job of prophets, is they predict, and God gives them a message and tells them to tell other people about that. And they said, someday, for unto us a child is going to be born. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. And you know that. You have that memorized because you've sung it for so many years and heard it for so many years. But that was one of the first songs. Then they go on in the Messiah to sing some other songs about when he was born, and then when he was a child, and then when he was an adult living on earth, and when he was crucified, which was not a great time. And then at the end, after he dies and he goes up to heaven. And so I wrote it's about the life and the death of Jesus. There's going to be a test on this and there'll be a review in a couple of weeks. I'll send you a review sheet. But you can't just say the Messiah was about God, because that wouldn't be accurate. It really is about the entire life of Jesus. It's about his death, and it's about what happened after he died too. And I want to show you, George Friedrich Handel wrote this in 24 days, which was amazing because back then they didn't have copy machines and they didn't have computers, and everything he had to write down for a whole full orchestra to perform this, he had to write it on a blank piece of paper, and he had to use it with a pen or a pencil or whatever, however he did it. But he had to write each part out, and then he couldn't Xerox them. He'd have to write out each. If there were 5 violins, he'd have to write 5 copies for that part. And so it was a lot of work. This is called an oratorio, this type of music. And it is a collection of songs. I'm not going to say collection because nobody collects them. He wrote them himself. So it's a group of songs. Some of them include choir. Some of them are solos. Some of them are small groups. So each song might have a little different way that it's performed. It might be solos. It might be the choir backing up a solo. It might be some small groups. It might be children. It might be men. It's always a religious story. When it's an oratorio, it's always a story from the Bible. And here, again, this is a religious story because it's the life and death of Jesus. There are no costumes. It's no acting. No costumes. But everyone all wear the same thing. Usually quite like choir robes, like if you're at a church. So it's different than a musical because you don't have somebody dressed up to be like the bad guy and a different person dressed up something different to be the good guy, things like that. Usually it's very uniform. It's very, usually people are in matching dresses or matching choir robes, something like that. And the most important, and the reason I bring this up at Christmas is 4 Inch West a Child is Born is a Christmas song. And also the final song is probably the most important song and the most famous song is called the Hallelujah Chorus. And I'm going to play it, and I think you may have, I would be surprised if you've heard this before, but this was the final song at the end after Jesus died and he rose and was up in heaven. This was the song that talks about once everybody gets to heaven, they're just going to be praising God, and everyone is singing to him, King of Kings, you are the King of Kings and you are the Lord of Lords, forever and ever and ever and ever. And it's written to be people praising God once they're up in heaven, worshiping him now that he's on the throne up in heaven. And it was so powerful. King George was, I want to make sure it was King George. Yes, King George was the king of London. And he was so moved by that last song. He stood up. He was a guest in the front row. He stood up and he was so moved by it that he stood up and everybody else followed him. And that is a tradition to this day that whenever people hear the Hallelujah Chorus, if you know anything about the traditional song and the tradition, people stand up on the audience. High school choirs sing it. It's very difficult. College choirs sing it. This is the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and I want to show you this, and maybe you'll recognize it. I want to show you this. This is the Hallelujah Chorus. So that is the most popular. I'm sorry, I put my coat on because I have to go meet kids at the bus stop. That is the most popular song in the Messiah, and it turned out to be a very, very big hit. And because King George was so moved by that song, when they started playing it, he stood up in the front row, and everybody thought, well, if the king is standing up, then I guess we better stand up. And so everybody joined him. And to this day, anyone who hears that, the audience people stand up. And it's a tradition for the Hallelujah chorus. And we'll talk about that a little bit next time. And there's going to be an assignment next week where I give you a Venn diagram where there's two circles and you have to compare the Hallelujah chorus, two different arrangements of it. So that's all I'm going to talk about today. This is George Friedrich Handel. And this was his world premiere because he was commissioned to create something that's never been done before. He wrote the Messiah, and this was his world premiere that was done for a fundraiser for a hospital in Ireland. Talk to you later. Bye.